everybody's going to have a piece of wax paper. It just helps to prevent a little bit of the water getting all over the table. I'm not actually going to give you cardboard, but just so you have a frame of reference. You know, again, everybody's got a different ultimate final goal, so I can't give you the same directions based on the position of your hand, but I'm going to give you the general idea of how to plaster. Your hand has to have a release agent. That's Vaseline. It's like a nice spa treatment on your hand. So take that Vaseline and rub it all over your hand. Think about the position you want your hand to be in, okay? Don't be afraid of it. It's just Vaseline, right? Okay? You don't want those tiny little hairs coming off your arm when I pull that cast off, right? So the more Vaseline you use, the better it's going to be.
Can I have mine be like
Perfect. So just the front side mainly too,
Okay.
where the plaster is going to be. You don't have to worry about the back side so much. Each person will be working with a partner. Your partner, the first thing I actually assess you on is how well did you construct your plaster cast. So I'm looking to make sure there's no holes and gaps in it, that it's strong, that it's not going to crack and fall apart and stuff up.
I have a question, like, could we work as partners, like do an arm wrestle kind of thing?
You mean that
awesome?
you and somebody else want to cast together? I'm okay with that. Okay, so there's a group of 3 of you, 2 of you pose, and then 1 person plasters. That's fine. Okay. Again, make that in your proposal. Write that out. Tell me the reasoning behind it. Why are you doing this? What does this symbolize? What does it represent? As much detail as possible. And those are the things we'll talk about in our conference too. Okay. All of the strips should be various lengths, but you might see a big square one. You might see some thin strips. I'll show you how certain ones can be used for certain parts. Are we ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Don't worry. No one's ever gotten stuck in anything. So go ahead and just relax. Relax your shoulder because you're sitting here for a while. Some people forget and then they're like really tense. So just relax. Make sure your partner feels comfortable. This is not as intense as if I was doing her face, right? Okay.
Wait, would you have to Vaseline?
I've done it with Saran wrap. So, okay, you're recording?
How would you be able to
Okay.
breathe?
Oh yeah.
I leave a part open. Okay. When your voices are quiet, you'll hear better, and I don't have to talk so loud over your voices. Right now, I'm dipping each piece into the water, okay? It's going to be drippy. It's going to be wet. But what I'm going to start to do is create down the center of her hand and kind of just sort of like a half covering, okay? I don't try to make it fit the whole side. What I need to keep in mind, if you can't see, feel free to move. What I need to do is create this sort of interlocking where one piece is laying over the other piece, okay? You need to adjust the camera angle. Feel free to do that too, so they can see what's happening. So if I have a longer piece, it can kind of come over the edge. But each piece that I put on connects to each other, because when it dries, we want those to stay together. So I work down the middle of the hand. I call it this a little lip on the edge. I leave that edge because that part needs to be there if you end up gluing it down to a surface. If you're not going to do that and your sculpture is going to be all around, we're going to have to work with you a little bit differently because we'll have to cut it off of your hand. So we would do a full-size casting and then we'd lift it up, pull the sides around, and snip it up. But I'm not going to demo that because that's not as popular, but I'll help people who are in that. So when you get to the fingers, you're going to get some indentation. But remember, plaster is not the same in detail. If you think back to George Segal, when we looked at his sculptures, they're not super realistic in detail. So you end up getting a little bit more like a mitten look to it. You're not wrapping individual fingers. It's like you've laid your hand up under a cloth and lifted it up. So you're not wrapping individual fingers. That's when we can't get people out of it, right? That's what we don't want. Okay, so as you can see, I've done one side. Before I do any more on the fingers, I'm going to come back, and now I'm going to start, we'll put this one here, with some little bit longer pieces. Hopefully we have some cut. And I'm going to work the other side. Again, overlapping. Think about a weave pattern, right? Everything is going one direction for my first layer. Somebody said, well, how many layers do you do? You should have 2 layers for sure, going opposite directions. So I've done all the horizontal kind of strips. Okay, and then, and again, you can decide how far up your arm you want to go. I'm going pretty far, but you can go shorter. And then you can do a vertical. So it's that back and forth sort of woven pattern. Underneath the hand, we call those the undercuts. The deeper you get under the hand, a little bit harder it is to get it off, but we just wiggle and pull it off. If you are pulling it off and it cracks, the beauty of plaster, think about your walls at home. Throw a baseball and it goes through the plaster in the wall, you just repair it. So same thing, we just repair if we break something or it cracks. Again, this is where people get sticky. They're like, oh, well, what do I do with the thumb? You kind of make it like a webbed, think of a duck with webbed feet. If you don't like that look, eventually you could cut into it if your hand is open and you're trying to grab something. You could cut in and isolate those fingers and then kind of bring more plaster down. So once it's dry, I can add stuff to this. I can cut out plastic, or plastic or cardboard wings and make it a flying hand, right? And then I would just plaster those to this and on top of each other. So you can build armatures, you can add on. Start with just focusing on that simple base. Okay? Questions so far as I'm going along? Anybody have any questions?
How long does it take to dry?
It won't fully dry for 24 hours. Don't panic, you're not sitting here for 24 hours. Okay? All we need to do is get it firm enough to get it off her hand, which will be about 10-15 minutes. Once I'm done plastering, it's starting to dry as I put it on. So, if you're noticing the thumb area, right, I'm not going to wrap it around her thumb. I'm going to drape some of these pieces so they connect. Think of a baseball glove, right? Anything that has the thumb connected, mittens, even an actual glove, your finger slides into it, but it's all connected. So there's going to be this sort of gappy part in between. Now, it looks like I've got everything covered, so it's good to have, whoever's sitting at your table or you yourself, look around and make sure there's no holes. This is just layer one. So then I come back and I start to work the opposite direction. The area that I like to reinforce the most is the area along this edge. Why do you think that has to be strong?
So you can.
Blakely? So the strips don't separate. That's good, and they don't break apart. Anything else? Why does that layer down here have to have a strength to it? Yes.
That's what secures it to whatever you're putting it on.
Right. If you're going to do it on a base, this secures it to the base. But do you notice how we have to hold this whole form up? If you're not strong down here, it can start to collapse on itself when you pull the hand out. So I like to make those edges really strong. So as I continue, I can just use little pieces. So people say, well, how many, layers? Along the edges, you can do up to 5 or 6 layers. On the top of the fingers, if you start building so many layers, what starts to happen to the hand? You sort of have these club looks to your hand. So whether or not you want that is up to you. But that's where a few students, this is Eleanor's sculpture. If she doesn't like what I'm doing, she's got to speak up and say, hey, can you not make it so thick along my fingertips? Again, yes, we have to be strong enough for the structure to stay in place. But you have to be the director of your own art a little bit and say, this is what I want. So don't be afraid to speak up in a kind way. And the person who's sculpting on you, right, should do that. So, okay, let me go back. I kind of talk and I lose my train of thought. So I was going this way, right? So now I've made my horizontals. Now I'm going to start doing the vertical strips and working my way up. Anywhere the hand might bend, fingers, wrist, bless you, try to reinforce that as well, because that's when they pull their hand out. Those are the areas that might twist a little bit or bend a little bit. So you need to really think about those areas too. You won't be talking, I hope, as much as I am. So when you're really focused, it's a little bit easier to pay attention to the direction you're going. Now, plaster generally has a rough surface to it. This is good plaster, so it's coming out nice and smooth for the most part. But little bumps and little things in there you won't be able to avoid. You can sand it. I have sanding paper here that we can make it a little smoother. Some people, I think it's Gabby, she is doing a whole painting on her hand. So her hand is literally like a blank canvas that she's going to paint on. So she wants it really smooth. So I said, well, whoever's your partner, make sure they try to smooth. Now, every layer doesn't have to be totally smooth. But when you get to that last layer, the more smooth you can make it, the better. Okay? Last year, I think it was, maybe I told you, Lexi Epperson took all the dust that fell off of the plaster, swept it all up, filled a cup of it, and then she poured it on her hand and made it super smooth. So I don't know that we have enough of that plaster to go around, but as you can see, this is the plaster. Really what we're putting on your hands is gauze that we would wrap around if you were injured, but this has been dipped in plaster. When it's wet, it activates the plaster, and when it's dry, it kind of hardens and comes together. So I'm trying to keep your fingers sort of defined in there, but again, it's not super realistic. You're not going to see fingernails and, you know, all of those things that you normally would see if we were doing a different kind of casting process. Okay? So I'm looking all around. Try to make sure that that edge is even. Remember, if it's too big and you're like, oh, there's so much sticking off, you're going to be able to cut that off if you don't want all of it. Okay, so I'm going to go around the edges again, keeping it. I also use warm water. It doesn't have to be warm. It's just nicer to your model, the student who has to sit there and have their arm drenched in water, to keep it warm. So don't feel like you have to go change the water in the middle of it all. Just leave it. If it gets cool, it's not going to still be that uncomfortable. As it starts to harden, it will get warmer. Now it doesn't get so hot that you're going to get burnt, right? There's none of that going on. But it will start to heat up a little bit because that's what plaster does. I told my other class, I didn't tell you the plaster story, did I?
No.
Have you ever seen plaster of Paris where you mix it up in a bucket?
Yeah.
Right? If you wanted to get a real accurate casting of your hand, people take their hand, they mix up plaster, and they stick it in there. Let it sit for a little bit, and the plaster starts to harden. And you pull your hand out, and you have sort of the opposite of like a mold, right, of your hand cast. Then you can fill it with wax, you know, chocolate. So you have like a mold, right, that you can pull things out of. You have to put a release agent in there. There's some different things to do. Well, some teachers have done plaster casting. Have you seen it on that show? Yeah. So some people have done plaster castings, right? But the one teacher who I saw post something, and again, there are all those urban legends out there, but this had a photo with it. Looked pretty convincing. Supposedly the teacher, in the midst of helping all these students who are doing these castings, forgot about a student who left their hand in too long. You know how I said it heats up? It heats up. Burned the fingers got stuck, and the student lost 3 fingers. I don't do plaster castings because I saw that and it freaked me out. So I was like, yeah, no one's ever gotten stuck in plaster strips. These are strips. I just rip it off your hand. Plaster in a bucket where your hand gets in, that hardens pretty fast, and you can get stuck into that. So be careful when you see things on shows or, you know, people do stuff. They even have kits out where you can do those plaster casts, which is cool, but you got to really pay attention to the warnings and the things you're doing. So just keep those things in mind as far as safety. Okay, I'm going to do a few more on her thumb just because they look like they need a few little more strength.
Eleanor, are you itchy? No.
Okay. So bring that camera, just make sure they see the whole thing nice and close, and then we'll pause it, and then we'll show it at the very end.
Should I stop it?
You can pause it, yeah, and then we'll show it when we take it
How
off.
do I pause it?
Or just stop.